Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June 24th, 2019. I barely know that. Apparently, I think it's Friday. I'm answering, in the background, answering Skype messages from Armando from Friday as though it happened this morning. And I took a quick look. 9:28 a.m. That hasn't happened yet. How did this message get here from the future? Well, it was a good suggestion, and maybe we can have this discussion, although I don't know. Is it outdated at this point? Who knows? It's been a rough weekend. Not a great start for a Monday. Well, I don't know. I guess it's typical for a Monday, although apparently I thought it was a Friday. That's typical, too. Had a little bit of trouble with the stream this morning, but everything seems back on track, so hopefully you will notice no problems. We'll always be recording here, so I think there'll always be a podcast ready to go. Who knows? I worked on the electrics last night, so I guess anything could blow out at any minute. But everything seems to have been successful so far. Got the lamp out front back up and running. Very happy, very proud of myself. Didn't have a war over the weekend. That was good. President made it to golf. That's actually, not a bad thing necessarily. I think his 58th trip to this Virginia golf course, or something like that. 100 and who knows how many days. Well, maybe we'll check in. If you follow SV Date on Twitter, he counts the days and the amounts of money, the estimated amount of money that Trump has spent on golf, but we'll never recover that. So I guess it's only for observational purposes. But we did get an extension of 2 weeks, maybe perhaps less, perhaps more. We'll see what happens on the ICE roundups, as I guess. I'm not sure how to feel about it. I mean, I know I'm glad they didn't start. I don't know whether I believe he's bluffing entirely and he was lying about the whole thing, or whether it's just another one of those dumb Trumpisms where he just isn't prepared to do that. He's just blurting things out. Nobody in the government knows it's coming, and so it takes them a long time to get up and running. Maybe he eventually intends to do it. I don't think it's safe to assume that he's not going to use every opportunity to use the power of the government to harass immigrants, migrants, refugees, etc., or basically anybody he feels down on that day. But as you know, we spent most of the last week getting ready, which was a very wise course of action, getting ready and trying to prepare people in immigrant communities and communities where there's high concentrations of immigrants for ICE raids beginning yesterday, Sunday. That was, I don't know whether he ever announced that they were going to happen Sunday, but there was word that next week it was going to happen. Even in these announcements, he's just vague, and Donald Trump loves to work with the vagaries of time. And of course, as you know, he ended up saying he was postponing things, and he even put his regular 2 weeks BS in the so-called announcement of it too. So 2 weeks, perhaps more, perhaps less. We'll see what happens. Of course, that would put the expulsion, roundup and expulsions right in the middle of our big celebration of freedom, July 4th. Trump and his people would, of course, not only not see the difficulty in juxtaposing those two messages, but would actually see them as consistent. For instance, actually, here's another story we ought to cover that offers us the same opportunity, I guess, to show how consistently they think patriotism and celebrations of freedom go along with autocracy and oppression. In Oregon, they're having some difficulty maintaining a Republican form of government, despite the fact that we've been promised this under the Constitution from the federal government. But I guess maybe we learned a little bit from, who was it? Was it Ken Cuccinelli was telling us about states might have to invoke their war powers? Well, I guess we're at that stage in Oregon because like as has happened before, I guess I should say. Oh, we got lots of echoing going on here. Let me see if I can take care of all of that noise all at once and then answer Greg. Yes, okay. I think we got most of the noise taken care of here. Over the weekend, sometimes the volumes get played with over the weekend and I don't get them reset properly. But up in Oregon, as we've seen in the past in a couple of other states, the minority in the state Senate has taken off to prevent a vote from being held. This time the minority is a Republican minority, and they are fleeing the tyranny of a carbon tax vote because that's exactly what the founders would have done. And in keeping with the rest of the spirit of the founders, they've got a new twist on it. Not only have they fled from the Capitol, but they have now the backing of the, of course, patriot militias who, on their behalf, are threatening to shoot any state troopers sent to bring recalcitrant senators back to the Capitol for a vote on this very, very tyrannical carbon tax, which is clearly an existential threat, et cetera, et cetera. So both sides, as you know, occasionally in Texas, the state Senate Democrats would take off, decamp for home, and in a great exercise of both sidesism, in Oregon, the Republicans have taken off and are threatening to kill police in order to stay taken off. Both sides, LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. I'm sure one day Chuck Todd will sit down with them and straighten the whole thing out for us. Everybody angry with the Sunday shows as well. Greg can tell us all about that. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
I'm sure that's on your list
somewhere.
It is.
And I gotta actually, the one I guess I have there is from Huffington Post. Sunday morning talk shows largely ignore Trump rape allegation.
Yeah, that we heard.
The Big Five, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, and Fox, were all but silent on E. Jean Carroll's horrifying claim, but Chuck Todd found time to talk about Trump Presidential Library.
Yes, well, President
I think it should
swatches.
be in a prison library, personally.
Yeah. That's right.
I mean, it's already built, so, why spend taxpayer money on it?
Oh, well, because he wants to steal that money, that's why.
So, E. Jean Carroll, who's a self-help columnist, and actually, I never heard of her, but apparently she's fairly well-known. That doesn't surprise me. She's way more well-known than I am. Said she was raped by Trump in the 90s, and basically had a really compelling column about it.
Yes.
Where she said such things
wasn't really even about that.
What's that?
It occurs to me that the column didn't even really, purport initially to be about that. It wasn't. It was
about men in general.
Here's like 10, 15 guys who have
kind of miserable, and in her life, she's found all sorts of people who have sexually assaulted her since she was growing up.
I mean, I feel compelled to point that out, but yes, okay, everybody's
but
focused.
The latest and worst of the horrible people was Donald Trump.
Right.
She's an ex-Miss Cheerleader USA. She's fairly well known, and it made the rounds for a day or so. But the problem with trying to keep a story like that in the media is severalfold. First of all, his base either doesn't care or thinks it's great and cheers him on.
Yes, there is that. That's the problem.
The media who's supposed to be covering that protected Les Moonves and Matt Lauer.
True, too, yes.
And what's his name, Mark Halperin. And I mean, the environment of, obviously Me Too has changed everything is like Me Too hasn't changed nearly enough.
Right, okay. That seems true, too.
And then on the third hand, there's actual real worries about going to war with Iran.
Yes.
The Democratic primary. I'm just giving you some examples of news stories that compete for limited space.
Joe Sestak, I was,
just
the whole weekend worrying about that.
That'll do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it had me going all weekend.
But actual, when you look at the Democratic primary, it isn't just at the debates of this week. Pete Buttigieg is having issues in terms of South Bend, Indiana shooting, and frankly not doing all that well there in terms of explaining it to his home crowd who are kind of mad at him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stories. There's actual real stories, and there's only limited amount of coverage. But the other nasty Trump story has gotten a lot more coverage, and that is the baby jails and the horrible conditions in the concentration camps.
Yep.
which, by the way, that's what they are. But we covered that last week.
Yes.
So, if you're going to dump on Trump, and you have the choice between a 90s sexual accusation and current conditions where at least 7 migrant children have died and they don't have soap and there are horrible conditions documented by both internal inspection from the DHS Internal General on the one hand and Inspector General on the one hand and lawyers who are down there looking at the kids right now on the other, that story gaining prominence is kind of easy to understand.
Yes. Well,
one's past, one's current.
Yeah. It's been quite a weekend, and that was without a war and without obsessing over Joe Sestak.
Right. So, and you mentioned the Oregon situation. There's other local stuff that comes in. But, the fact of the matter is that 35% of Trump's base, 25% at least, are evangelicals who don't care about anything. And so if you're going to pander to them, you're not going to cover this story. If you're trying to break through with all the other stuff going on, there has to be something that sustains it. E. Jean Carroll has to, say, oh, well, I'm going to file charges now, or I'm going to go on the talk shows in the morning and The View and so on and so forth all week. That's the kind of thing that sustains a media story. And short of that, it's 2 days and then you move on to the next thing.
Yes.
Not saying that's good. I'm not applauding it. I don't think it's great. I think it's a huge story that ought to be, covered, maybe with 3/4 of the intensity that Hillary's emails were, that kind of thing. Every day there's something new. But it's not going to be. It's just not going to be.
No, I guess not. Although I will say I was, I wasn't familiar with Jean Carroll either. But when I got, when it was explained exactly who she was, it occurred to me that this could be an extraordinarily powerful thing. Not even just because of the writing, but I guess she has for a long time been the advice columnist in Elle magazine, which is, we've seen things catch fire from out of the pages of Teen Vogue like never before. It hasn't changed.
In the back of my head, I hear a little voice of women saying, "What do you mean? We're furious about this." Yes.
Yeah. Well, right.
But we're talking about media coverage right now.
Yes, definitely. But I think this helps sustain the same sort of thing. Once again, there's this one portion of the country like, hello, are you even watching? And it struck me as a very dangerous and powerful in a good way. Dangerous in a good way too, because of who it's dangerous to. Undercurrent that would not catch the attention of the male-dominated media or the male-dominated media consumers either, for that matter. But that women everywhere would be like, well, of course I know who that is. In between football games, I rarely read the Elle magazine, but.
In this story, Sunday morning talk shows largely ignore Trump rape allegation. It notes, NBC's Meet the Press aired an interview with Trump that taped Friday. Given the timing, host Chuck Todd was likely unaware of Carroll's allegation before his interview with the president. Still, Todd seemingly did not reference the accusation during other portions of Sunday's show. Not only that, in this world where what we described with the media cycle about all these other things going on at the same time happens all the time, what kind of stupid idea is it to interview the president Friday and air it Sunday? We could have gone to war and been destroyed in that period of time.
Right.
So many things could have happened. To give you an idea of how fast and furious things fly here, you may not know this, but there's a new Middle East peace initiative that was brought up, discussed,
about that.
dismissed, and now we're on to the next thing. Jared unleashed his let's get private investors to remake the Middle East, and it was so bad and so boring that nobody even protested it.
I guess. I suppose I wouldn't protest it because...
And it's gone. You're not going to hear another word
the Middle
about
East all private investors as it is. I mean, that's what
why wouldn't
Saudi
you do
Arabia?
That? I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
I don't know.
But there's just so much competing for all of this.
They already own their entire countries. I mean, the ruling family is literally it's just a large plot of land that they own. And
why
and
don't you just invest in them? I mean, maybe that's the plan, but it's not going to work. Nobody's that interested. I guess the point I'm making here, though, for this particular segment is that because things always move that fast, the decision to interview on Friday and then air Sunday with so much going on, just with the baby jails alone.
Yeah.
It's an awful news decision.
Certainly.
But it fits well with the entertainment beef up the ratings decision.
I guess so. Yeah, you can flog the show Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, and nobody's watching my show. Let's make people watch my show.
I guess so. I mean, it's a bad news decision. It's bad reaction to the new news cycle. Reality is certainly, but even just like, well, if you taped it on Friday, that gave you all of Saturday to get ready to tell us on Sunday how many of the things in your Friday tape were lies.
Yes. And if that's the reason that you did it, that's fine. But if you're not going to challenge him either before or after
right.
or during,
that's the thing.
then what's the point?
People have thought it might be wise to tape. That's been suggested. Let's tape him and only air it a day later. And
I like,
that way.
But that is a new idea. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think that all President Trump comments should be on a 5-month tape delay.
Right, that way he'll.
First of all, he'd spare us, and secondly, we'd have a chance to fact check him.
It should at least be 2 weeks delayed, so that when he says everything's going to happen in 2 weeks, you could say, "Oh, that didn't happen." Narrator voice, it did not happen.
It did not happen that way. Right?
So I know a lot of people complaining
that
about
wall,
that.
The narrator. Well,
right?
No,
they didn't. Private investors in the Middle
wall,
East.
And secondly, he didn't pay for it.
Right. I did see a lot of people commenting on that they could have spent Sunday, with the commentary around the tape saying, well, we checked that out. That isn't true. We checked that out. That isn't true. Even though a lot of it, the other complaint was that a lot of it should have been immediately obvious and known to Chuck Todd if he were really the sort of person who paid attention to politics and the hot stories of the day, which is what he tells us all the time. I can't examine this because I'm too busy focusing on the hot story of the moment. How you missed, honestly, Friday not knowing about the rape allegation. That was my Friday. What was yours like?
Yeah, pretty much. All right, so we have that.
Yes.
There's going to be more on all of this. My pundit roundup this morning was predominantly devoted to the baby jail situation.
Yes, that sounds right and proper.
I want to give you some examples. This is Isaac Chotiner writing in the New Yorker. Inside a Texas building where the government is holding immigrant children, hundreds of immigrant children who have been separated from the parents of family members are being held in dirty, neglectful, and dangerous conditions at Border Patrol facilities in Texas. This week, a team of lawyers interviewed more than 50 children at one of those facilities in Clint in order to monitor government compliance with the Flores settlement. Which mandates that children must be held in safe and sanitary conditions and moved out of border control custody without unnecessary delay. The conditions the lawyers found were shocking. Flu and lice outbreaks were going untreated. Children were filthy, sleeping on cold floors, taking care of each other because of lack of attention from guards. Some of them had been in the facility for weeks. Warren Binford, who's a law professor at Willamette University and director of its clinical law program, a female was discussing this with a number of outlets. She told me that although Flores is an active court case, some of the lawyers were so disturbed by what they saw, they decided to talk to the media. We discussed the daily lives of the children in custody, the role the guards are playing. So that's an interview. This one is from ABC. After assessing 39 children under the age of 18, she described conditions of extreme cold temperatures, lights on 24 hours a day, no adequate access to medical care, basic sanitation, water, or adequate food. All showed evidence of trauma. This is from the Texas Tribune, which also publishes a how you can help if you want to contribute list that they're building, and it's an ongoing added to. Lawyer, inside an immigrant detention center in South Texas, basic hygiene just doesn't exist. The attorney said running water so bad mothers save any bottled water they can to mix with baby formula. The stories that they heard from people in the shelter echo tales at other facilities where people say conditions are substandard. Interestingly, over the weekend, Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a bill that bans, that makes it a law, right? Go back to Schoolhouse Rock, but I believe it's law in Illinois now because he signed a bill that bans private immigration detention centers in the state, making it the first in the nation to forbid the practice, which is something I'd like to see grow and move to other states, including Texas, according to a release from the governor's office.
Okay. It's good to see.
And that's just a sampling, and it's bad.
It is.
I mean, Bill Krista points out, just saying, for the increased cost of Trump's butting into the already fine July 4th celebration in D.C., we could provide decent and sanitary conditions for children at the border.
Well, he doesn't want to do it that way. He wants to do it the other way.
Right. His way.
Yeah.
So here's a good Max Boot column, which I enjoyed. Marco Rubio's humiliating transformation into a Trump fanboy is complete.
Okay. That seems true.
Right?
Even Armando would read that Max Boot column.
Oh, yeah, and love it and say, Max Boot, that guy, I've always followed him. Now, I doubt that a Democratic president would stop supporting the dissidents in Venezuela or stop cracking down on Chinese trade abuses. He or she might even implement those policies more consistently and effectively than Trump. Trump's already tiring of the Venezuela policy that Rubio's advocated.
Had one.
And maybe Democrats would reinstate the emissions limits on power plants that Trump is repealing, and a Democrat might very well undo Trump's tax cut, which has sent the deficit soaring without significant impact on economic growth, and a Democrat would no doubt appoint pro-choice rather than anti-abortion judges. But you know what a Democratic president probably won't do? A Democrat wouldn't obstruct justice, ignore congressional subpoenas, break campaign finance laws, malign the FBI, or invite foreign interference in our election. A Democrat wouldn't engage in racism or xenophobia to win votes. A Democrat wouldn't vilify immigrants and lock children in cages. A Democrat wouldn't call the media the enemy of the people and accuse the opposition of treason. A Democrat would not lie incessantly. A Democrat would not trash America's allies or kowtow to dictators such as North Korea's Kim Jong-un, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and Saudi Prince Mohammed Bonesaw.
Yes, right.
Rubio has decided that Trump is the future of the Republican Party. He's probably right. That's why I'm not a Republican anymore and why I couldn't imagine supporting Rubio for any office ever again. I'm sorry I supported him in 2016. It'd be nice if more people who actually did the wrong thing apologized for it.
Yeah.
But more importantly, didn't do it again.
True. I think we're probably even safe on that. Yep. Marco Rubio and Max Boot, but then again, who knows and would it matter?
Who knows? But again, there's that 8 to 10% of the population, that sliver that Max Boot might possibly appeal to, in terms of, I don't know if they read him, but that's the small group of persuadables that is worth trying to persuade, whereas the evangelicals and the Trump rally goers are deplorable, and they're actually not worth talking to.
Okay. Don't waste your time.
Don't waste your time. So, there's that. Here's an interesting thing in the few minutes we have before the first break here. It's actually caught my eye. Ex-Fox Newser, Carl Cameron. Remember Carl Cameron?
Yeah, the name rings a bell.
Name ring a bell?
Yes.
Takes his unfinished business to a progressive startup.
Oh, no.
When folks leave Fox News, they quite often pursue projects that align with the worldview of their former employer. Carl Cameron, who covered politics at Fox News for over 2 decades, is not doing that.
Okay.
I have a little bit of unfinished business. He's teaming up with Joseph Romm, author and blogger on climate science and climate policy at Think Progress. And their collaboration is called FrontPageLive.com, a news site. It's basically a news aggregator like the Drudge Report, except for liberals.
Oh.
So just went live. And I went to it just to see what was going on. And the first story that hit my eye, of course, was a polling story. Right. As unemployment rises in 8 Trump states, polls show some have turned on him. And I clicked on it, and it turned out it's from CNBC, interestingly enough. It's always nice when stories like that get to a different audience that we might otherwise reach. Unemployment is rising in 8 Trump states. Polls show some have turned on him. And the examples they give, Trump net approval and rising jobless rates.
Yeah.
And these are interesting. These are from Morning Consult in terms of the Trump net approval. And if you were ranking the states in terms of who do you think approves of him the most and who do you think approves of him the least, you might pick Mississippi as being the most Trump net approval at 17%, although they've got a 5% rising jobless rate comparing May 2018 and May 2019.
I'd certainly put them in the top of the southern portion of the list, I guess.
But here's at the bottom.
Oh.
Arizona, -6.
That I would not have picked.
Right? They are less Trump favorable, Arizona.
Yeah. People have mentioned this.
Then South Carolina's at 10. Indiana's at 3. Missouri's at 6. Missouri's really a lost cause state here.
Yes. Well, wait.
Right?
What do you mean exactly? Which turn?
I mean they're turning red.
Okay.
It's not a purple state.
All right. Yeah.
And therefore that makes them a lost cause state because they're voting with the South.
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay.
It's not as much fun when you explain it, but that's
no. You have to be careful. Is that now?
No, I don't have to be careful. I meant what I said, and I said.
Oh
what
no!
I meant.
I mean,
elephant faithful, 100%.
Lost cause, oh my gosh, don't worry, but forget them. They're lost to us, or like lost cause, like South will rise again. Lost cause.
Both.
Okay, got it. Just wanted to make sure.
All right. Mississippi 17%, South Carolina 10% Trump net approval, Missouri 6%. Okay.
Yes.
Indiana 3%. Missouri's more Trumpy than Indiana.
That is...
Nebraska 2%. Missouri's more Trumpy than Nebraska.
Okay.
Kansas 1%. North Carolina -4, Arizona -6. All of them have high unemployment. Some of those states are going to be in play.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, Arizona has come up
not
before.
Missouri. It's a lost one.
Well, okay. Sorry, Missouri. What can you do? I'm sure there's nothing could ever change.
Don't blame the Democrat for losing the Senate election. It's just the way Missouri is.
Oh, I guess that's something to think about too. All right. We'll have 2 minutes to ponder it. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support.
So you can ask me about the quality of this call.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think the quality of the call so far has been pretty good. We can continue on then.
Good.
Now I'm up to date on our links.
So I was saying just at the break, everybody blames Clara McCaskill for losing, but when you look at Missouri and see where it stands in terms of Trump approval, she was destined to lose. Any Democrat would have been destined to lose. Now, do we get a white supremacist like Josh Hawley? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way the state's turning, apparently.
I guess so. Must be true. Well, St. Louis has kind of been boiling over for a while.
Yeah, and that's part and parcel of it. You have that kind of background going on, and at the same time you have the Democratic primaries and our first debates coming up this week. Now, you don't have a show on Wednesday and Thursday because of other things. Right?
Well, yes, my original plan was Thursday, Friday, and now I'm starting to look like Wednesday might not happen either. So, okay, yeah, we're not
going to be able to preview the debate on the day of the debate, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think so. When's the debate? Is it Thursday or Wednesday?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's 2 days.
Yes. Oh, right. Yeah. All right. Well, when's the first one?
Before the second one. I think it's Wednesday.
Okay.
I have to check.
Might be able to squeeze one for Wednesday, depending on scheduling.
Yeah,
I'd like to be able to do that. At least preview one of them.
So, it's good to set things up beforehand.
Yes,
all right.
Always set things up.
South Carolina just happened. Everybody was visiting the fish fry and giving speeches. Kamala Harris had a great speech. The fun part is that she was preceded down the escalator by a drum line.
Yes.
It was perfect. It was so good. And she gave a rather fiery speech talking about the fact how she would prosecute the Trump record, because that's what she does and that's what she's good at. But she also spent a lot of time talking about herself and how she got here and things that she had to grow up with in terms of discrimination and stuff. In other words, opening herself up for a more personal approach, which went over very well, and frankly, candidates have to do. You may be reluctant, you may be, an I and not an E, you may be an introvert and not an extrovert, but you got to get out there and talk about yourself, especially for those people who don't know who you are.
Right.
If you do not do that, you will not do well. Now, Pete Buttigieg has done fairly well doing exactly that up until now. But after a shooting in South Bend that he had to go back and take care of, he's getting all sorts of pushback on that. Not necessarily good pushback. So this is from NBC News. Buttigieg learns the hazards of campaigning for president as a mayor. Get the people that are racist off the street. South Bend, Indiana. Mayor Pete was met with angry shouting and heckles as he spoke during a tense and emotional town hall meeting Sunday about the fatal shooting of a black man by a white police officer a week ago. Fatal shooting of a black man by a white police officer. Has that ever happened before? I think it has.
Well, right.
It's been one of the first big tests for the mayor as he soared from obscurity to top-tier presidential candidate, and he is top-tier. He's learning the hard way that mayors can be held immediately accountable on the presidential campaign trail, especially when there are challenges at home. That's all that little piece says. But as others have pointed out, maybe it would have been smarter for him to resign and run full-time so that crises at home don't catch you unawares.
Yes. I am sure that usually people will do that. I am pretty sure he probably thought, well, I'm not really going to make it to the top tier, so
that's one side of it. The other side of it, it's the difference between running when you're young and running when you're not so young.
Yeah, that's true too.
And you have an idea of those things happening, and you might remember, other situations where that might have happened. So,
possibly.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And then, of course, here's a couple of pieces on Biden. Biden's soft spots exposed, says NBC. But Democratic rivals strike only glancing blows. The former vice president comments about working with segregationists in the Senate provided the backdrop at a gathering of 2020 candidates in South Carolina. Don't forget that the South Carolina Democratic Party is predominantly made up of people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And this points out, but while some of Biden's vulnerabilities have been exposed, it's clear that most of his rivals are reluctant to exploit them directly, at least for now. That's because Democrats don't want them to hammer too hard. They get very angry when you start attacking other Democrats.
Yes.
And Bernie's going to find that out. Here's another piece from HuffPost. In South Carolina, black voters willing to give Biden benefit of the doubt. The former vice president faced a torrent of criticism for comments this week, but some black voters in South Carolina are willing to let him off the hook for now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At this point, I give him the benefit of the doubt, said Miles White, 61. I don't think he meant them the way they came out. For now, Biden remains a clear frontrunner. He received the support of 37% of those surveyed, down from May, but still far ahead of Warren, who trailed a distant second at 17%. So again, this highlights some of the other stuff we were talking about last week. Biden is vulnerable, but he's also still the frontrunner. And it's not like anything that you think should destroy his candidacy is actually going to destroy his candidacy. That may happen over time. It will erode. But it's not like, oh, I heard that. It reminded me why I'm not voting for him. I'm voting for somebody else. I don't understand why everybody is. We don't know for why everyone is. There's a number of strengths that Biden has that are still going to persist. And he, at the end of the day, may well be the Democratic nominee. And if he is, the stuff we're talking about now is not going to hurt him in the general.
Yeah, I guess if that happens, people will be putting
certainly not in Missouri.
Right. Well, it won't cost them much there. Just it's not going to be a factor, I guess.
No, it won't. I mean, because Missouri's not going to vote for him.
Yeah. So,
but North Carolina might.
Yes, they might, and
and Arizona might, according to the data.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess if you get it all the way through the primaries, what we learned last week was that Democratic voters place a huge premium on just getting rid of Trump, and they might literally take anybody.
And they're willing to overlook a lot of things. And again, with half the party being moderate to conservative, the litmus tests that people will apply in the Democratic primary are not going to be universal. That is to say, there are people who say, I can't vote for him because of X, but that's not necessarily the bulk of the party.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of the purpose of washing people in the primaries, if you can.
Yeah, that's right. And the other side of that coin is that, okay, you have to show us how you handle those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because if you can't handle them in the primary, you're never going to handle them against Trump. So go ahead, get attacked. Let's see how you do.
Yes. All right. Okay, we can handle that. I'm pretty sure he will get attacked.
Right. I'm pretty sure he will. All right. So let's see what other profiles we have here. We have a nice profile of Elizabeth Warren that came out in the New York Times Magazine.
Oh,
Elizabeth Warren is completely serious about income inequality, corporate power, corrupt politics, and about being America's next president. But will people respond? Warren's been a politician for only 7 years since she announced her run for the Senate in 2011 at age 62. She's still thinking through how she communicates her ideas with voters. If you wonder why she comes across sometimes as being more college professor-y than some of the others, it's because she's been a college professor until about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
The only thing that worries me is I won't describe it in a way that she trailed off. It's like teaching class. Is everybody in here getting this? And that's what I just struggle with all the time. By the way, she's getting much better about it. How do I get better at this? How do I do more of this in a way that lets people see here and say, oh, yeah. And when you watch her, she's getting much better at town halls, for example. She's getting better at this politician thing. But she's clearly trying to communicate what it is that she stands for. And her particular personal story is also not necessarily a benefit, because then that gets into that whole DNA controversy, which I don't think she particularly handled all that well. So it's interesting because Warren is focusing on policy and hoping the American public, and certainly the Democrats in the primary, want to focus on that. I'm not sure they are. Harris is trying to focus on a mix of things: policy, bare knuckles politics, and her task is to get more of herself into the mix so that people know a little bit more about her and where she's coming from. That'll be her task in the second debate.
All right.
And more of that and less going after Joe Biden, who she will share the stage with, because Democrats want to see contrast, but they don't necessarily want to see, steel cage deathmatch. So she's got a bit of a balancing act to do. She's got the talent and the smarts to pull it off, but that's really going to be the dynamic there. Whereas on the first night, Warren, with a cast of not all top, 4 of the 5 top candidates are going to be the second night. So Warren has to be in the situation where she stands above everybody else without lecturing them. And that's going to be her task.
Okay. And, well, that's maybe not the easiest thing for the professor, to not lecture.
No, but if she does that and she's able to come across, then, she's got a chance to shine on that night. So the opportunities are there, but also the risks. And, of course, that's exactly what you would expect in a primary debate.
Yes. Plus some complaining that it's all rigged.
But it's not as simple as, okay, everybody just come out and attack Joe Biden. That's not going to work.
It's going to be interesting to see, actually, whether candidates feel constrained from doing that in the debate where he's not present.
Yes.
Also, he's not here to defend himself. Does it look, cheap to do this, or is this exactly the right time to hit him where he can't hit back? I don't know.
Yeah, it's my advice would be it's not the right time.
Yeah, we'll probably see both strategies employed, and then we'll see which one tests
We'll see what the flavor is of the first night compared to the second night.
Yeah.
Might be a little bit more mixing up in the second night because I don't expect Bernie to do anything except be Bernie.
Yeah. Well,
that's... he's got one speed, right. And he hasn't hesitated up till now to attack Biden, and part of his shtick is to be anti-establishment.
Yeah.
And so, it's perfectly within character. That's the thing about Bernie. He can do that because it's perfectly within character of who he is and who he's been.
That is true. We don't have to wonder about, was this a calculation or not?
Right. Are you just doing this because you're... No, this is Bernie. Bernie's being Bernie.
Are you doing this just because it's what you always do? Well, you got me there.
So of all the people to attack Biden, he's the one that actually has the most cred to do that.
Yeah.
And he'll be on the same stage. So that'll be interesting. So Harris could, for example, let Bernie attack Biden, and Harris could just tell you about herself and her plans.
I guess that's...
And that might well work.
Yeah, if it's that time in her campaign to do that, then, hey, it's early days. It's a good time to test these things out. Yeah, so if you're the kind of person who wanted evaluate the debate not on substance but on style, and it's still early enough to do that, there will be people trying out different approaches. It's kind of instructive and interesting. Not that I think I'm going to watch all that closely, but that's me. I'll wait to hear about it afterwards from all the people who watched it closely.
Now, there's been some interesting stories and pieces about exactly what it means to the race overall to have primary debates. One of the interesting things about primary debates is that whereas presidential debates between the two parties, once you've picked candidates, basically has no change on public opinion. We say that every 4 years. Oh, the big debate between Romney and Obama, it's not going to change anything.
Yeah, it doesn't,
but
generate
primary debates do. We saw that with Trump. We will see that with the Democrats. How much? G. Elliott Morris estimates around 6%. Giulio Zari, these are all political scientists, says, actually, the biggest impact is usually on the early debates. Because people don't really know what to expect, and then they get a glimpse of what candidates are, what their style is, what their stories are, and so on and so forth. So that makes this week's debates rather important.
Yeah, I guess so. It's interesting that these things do shape the... Well, speaking of, by the way, of Trump, the way he, I guess you're thinking about how he set himself apart, I guess, in the Republican debates. I should note for the record, he is saying that he plans to he'll live tweet the Democratic debate, which I guess means he's going to try out and roll out new nicknames for people.
And spelling. He'll roll out all sorts of new and unique ways to spell
that should
words.
Be interesting. I wonder how he's going to deal with Buttigieg, if he'll even try.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. Well, we'll see. I think it's actually something he has done before, and it turned out not to be all that popular, but I guess maybe that was, there could be any number of factors involved in that. And he, having not secured his own nomination last time we did this, I could see why it might not have been as popular as it would be now for the sitting president to do this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it's going to have any impact at all.
No, but
I would suspect it does not. Certainly the people who are going to be watching the debates are the partisans, and the partisans really could care less about what Trump says.
Yeah. I mean, it'll just be, I guess, talking to the Republicans who would criticize everything that everybody had to say, and I guess they can all just point and laugh off in their corner.
Yeah, I suppose. So, a couple of other lightning round things before I go for today.
All right.
Looks like Sarah Gideon is announcing running against Susan Collins for U.S. Senate because Mainers deserve a senator. And let's see what happens with that. Collins' polling numbers actually are not all that good. We have a story from Dan Diamond pointing out that people are covering the fact that rural hospitals and healthcare in areas like Oklahoma are in trouble without mentioning the fact that the reason that they're in trouble in Tennessee is another one, because the states rejected Medicaid expansion.
Yes.
And that's part and parcel of why they're in trouble. And so part of the problem with media coverage is that they don't talk about the root source of where the problems are. This is terrible. Look what's happening. There's a rural health crisis. Well, that's because the Republicans in that state, this is back to the Jon Stewart complaint from a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
Okay. It's because the Republicans rejected Medicaid. This is a Republican state dominated by Republicans who caused the crisis. And if you don't put that as part of your story, you're not telling voters the story. Well, we can't do that. It sounds too partisan.
Oh.
Yes, but that's actually what happened. Yeah, but it's like too partisan.
Yeah. Well, everyone knows you got to cover in any good news story who, what, when, where, and how.
And why Democrats are in disarray.
Yeah, right. And why the Democrats ruined it. Right. That's true. I thought why was always supposed to be a part of your story, but they have eliminated it in case, lest they look to be partisan, because the why is often not good for Republicans.
Right.
Because it's about governing.
Jeff Tidrich tweeted what I thought was a classic he said, she said.
Oh.
Right? Trump said, I grabbed him by the pussy, and women say he grabbed us by the pussy.
Yes.
That's, he said, she said.
Right.
That's what happened with E. Jean Carroll. And again, why should that not get more coverage? It should.
Yeah, I wondered whether...
there's a context here, in other words. Or as Kevin Cruz puts it, the allegations of sexual assault and misconduct against the president are a classic case of he said, she 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 said, 17 times.
And they all said the same thing, too.
Yes.
Which is weird. And I mean, everybody, including, like you said, Donald Trump. I just told Billy Bush that he does that.
That's right. I normally don't use language like that, but that's what Trump said, and it was on Access Hollywood. And then this one on the Iran situation, which is kind of interesting. Elizabeth Saunders, professor who follows these things, prompted by this New York Times article of urge to launch an attack, Trump listened to the skeptics, meaning Tucker Carlson convinced him not to do it. Prompted by this New York Times article, a couple of thoughts on the politics of Trump's decision. Too long, didn't read?
Sure.
Yeah, he probably had more leeway to hold off because he's a Republican. And then here's some research to back that up. And so basically, hawks can stop attacks and get away with it.
Yes.
Doves can get away with attacks. That's just the way it works.
Yeah. That's kind of it.
Nixon can go to China.
Right.
And there was a reason for that. So she concludes hawks still matter for Republican presidents, and there's hawks and doves in both parties. But if Trump heard Tucker saying it would harm his reelection, that likely resonated. Also shows a big spectrum of advisors in any administration, wider in this one, but not new. That is to say, they range from John Bolton to Jared Kushner in terms of advising attacks. But the bottom line is, whatever else is going on, Trump had more leeway here, politically speaking, as a Republican.
Yes.
Mommy party, daddy party, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I believe that. It's pretty easy to see. I mean,
right.
also
and that's why the Iran
matters part.
Pulling back isn't the bigger story.
Yeah, and mixed feelings for a lot of people.
For everybody, sure.
Good. I'm glad he didn't do it. I mean, I'm laughing at the fact that he said, I'm doing it in 10 minutes, and then he watched television and decided not to. There's plenty to criticize there, but in terms of not bombing things, I'm usually for that.
Now you could cover that with that lickspittle approach, like the New York Times did.
Oh yeah. Well,
they put a story about that, citing reluctant admiration for his approach.
Yes.
No.
Well, okay.
Relief is not reluctant admiration.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing I
it could have been worse. It's not the same thing as great praise.
Yeah. I mean, I've reluctant relief, like you said, at it having, and not even reluctant, the relief, but I mean, there's nothing, I have no admiration for having changed his mind about major policy initiatives because he was watching television and the TV host said, don't do it. And he just, and he didn't because the TV told him not to. That's hard to admire, reluctantly or otherwise.
Right. It's just amazing that media still plays that game. But they always do. They always find something good to say. Chuck Todd finds something good to say so that he can nail that. He can have that he can nail that interview and get him on.
Right.
And it just, the access just isn't worth sacrificing the truth to get.
In this case, definitely not. I mean, I understand why he went that way, or why he did the thing, why he even pursued the interview at all, which is to say, well, the reason I think that they went after the interview was because we now don't need it. We just had it with George Stephanopoulos. But the thing is, I'm not George Stephanopoulos. I have to
watch my show.
Yeah.
What good does it do me to have ABC do it and watch his show? So Eric Bollett tweets, ABC and NBC landed lengthy exclusive interviews with Trump last week on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being nothing and 10 being a lot. How much did you, as a news consumer, learn? Most of the people responding gave it a 1. I gave it a 1 on both points. Did I learn anything about the media that I didn't know? No. Did I learn anything about Trump I didn't know? No. And so for those of you who just get sick and tired of being sick and tired and who just have had it with the mealy-mouth approach that, the networks take and institutions like the Gray Lady take to Trump, just keep in mind this one thing. People have already made up their mind about Trump. This isn't going to help or hurt. It doesn't make any difference. Don't lose sleep over it. Yeah, it'd be nice if everybody were Daniel Dale and took him to task, but Trump is never going to get the people back who have given up on him. And for those people in those states with rising unemployment, for those 8 to 10 persuadables, they don't watch Chuck Todd. If they did, they already would have made up their mind.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't think he was going to change any minds necessarily, but yeah.
Look, Trump was held to task on TV. That changes everything. Actually, it changes nothing. Even if it went well from our perspective,
I guess
it still wouldn't change everything.
That's true. Although I guess you like to see.
I like it. It'd be more fun.
Well,
it'd be more satisfying.
You'd
but it wouldn't
feel
change
like
anything.
the media was doing the thing that they keep telling us they're here to do.
Yeah, and we'd pat them on the back and we'd congratulate them, and it still wouldn't change anything.
That is true. I mean, it might be useless, and so I guess maybe that's it. You say, well, I might as well keep my access because nothing's changing, and so I could either be without an exclusive interview, although wasn't there like 16 different exclusive interviews last week? Time magazine has a transcript out that they did, and
but separate things there. It's not going to make a difference politically because people have already made up their mind about Trump, and it's not good for him because he's underwater on just about everything. Mm-hmm. The other side of the coin, though, is if you're trying to somehow preserve your respect, self-respect, dignity, whatever. Don't be checked out.
I guess. I suspect he's feeling fine.
All the way to the bank, I suppose. But, that doesn't last. David Gregory probably felt the same way. When's the last time you thought about him?
Oh, that's a good point. Not often. Yeah, what is it? I don't know. What happened to him? I don't feel like
he lost ratings.
Is that it? And then he just... okay.
That's all it takes.
Okay.
Don't watch. You don't like him? Don't watch.
I liked, there was that interview where he admitted to obstruction of justice. That was a good one. How come we don't have any more of those?
That would be a very useful one, but he doesn't give those. He's not going to hit hard news people.
Okay. Well,
he'll avoid those.
Yeah. That's interesting. He
could sit down with Carl Cameron. That'd be interesting.
I guess so. Yeah.
Or
now he's got a platform
O'Brien,
to go to.
or some really good, hard-hitting interviewers.
Is that what's going on now? Is that the interviewers he's doing are like specialty show? I mean, they're
softy stuff,
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I
Fox
assume he
News,
would schedule that.
George Stephanopoulos, Chuck Todd. These are not, hard news people known for their great interviews.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if Lester Holt was.
You're going to do MSNBC? I'd much rather you sit down with Andrea Mitchell than Chuck Todd.
I guess that's it.
She is a very good interview, and she can be very tough.
You think?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I do.
Well, I have not. I'm not a close watcher of these things, as you know.
Right.
Okay.
And she's not only a very experienced journalist, but I can imagine as a woman sitting down and having her ask him about the allegations.
Yes.
And she don't take crap from nobody. And that would be a really interesting interview. But no, they give it to Chuck Todd, who, rather than bring it up, is going to talk about where the presidential library is going to be.
Yeah. Oh, and that was a story all in itself. I mean, I'm going to locate it in one of my own buildings so that the government has to pay me rent forever.
Right.
Well, all right.
Okay, that makes a news headline and is good for a good tweet. But with everything else going on, the baby jails and the credible allegations of rape, I think, are a bit more important. And I'd rather see Andrea Mitchell asking those questions of him than Chuck Todd asking about a presidential library. My own personal opinion.
I have not. Well, yeah. I guess I'd rather.
So look to it not to happen.
That's controversial. Okay. Yes. I guess so. Huh.
Anyway, that should take you to the end of the hour, and then for the rest of the week is yours.
Okay. Well, I'll take it.
You'll have to.
Yeah, I got no choice. Okay.
But as always, it's been enjoyable talking to you. This is Greg.
Thank you.
Speaking to my good friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning.
Yeah.
And let's see what you talk about for the rest of the day.
We will see. I put a bunch of stories away. That's true, and I'm sure there will be redirected along the way. But, all right, thank you. Is there anything we didn't get to that was on your list I should scan down? That's usually a good source.
Not on the list. I saw that there's this entity that I never heard of called Democrats for Trump, the founder of whom put a Wall Street Journal editorial that said, if you want to win election, you better dump Pence and pick up Nikki Haley, otherwise you're doomed.
Okay, yeah, I did. I didn't realize that the person who wrote it had made this strange, weird...
Yeah, you have to establish those credentials before you go ahead and make the analysis.
Yeah,
and now that you've established how credible you are, let's take you seriously.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I did see that being critiqued out there, but it just looked like a dumb thing. Somebody felt like speculating, but I didn't realize how dumb until just now.
Right.
All right. Well, Democrats for Trump. He loves taking advice from Democrats, so that should work pretty well.
Right. I suppose. I have a feeling this guy also started Jews for Jesus and Palestinians for Netanyahu, but, I have to go back and check. It could be just sheer speculation on my part.
Yes. Okay. Well, we are responsible not to give it to us, as far as I know. All right. We'll take that and run with it. Thank you.
I'll see you whenever I see you, which was
correct.
Not so quick.
Yeah. We'll figure it out, and I'll let you know, brief you on the schedule off the air. Although, maybe we could do it in public on Twitter. Thanks, Greg. Take care. We'll see you again soon. And, we'll take our quick break, 1 minute, and figure out what's up next after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. All right. Yeah. Well, let's dive into Pocket and see what we have set aside for today's consideration. Usually, I don't know. Do I go with Axios on this one? Not sure. Let's see if I can get the article up. I can only get the tweet to come up on the phone this morning. But this seems to have gotten a lot of attention and might be worth rummaging through. The Axios exclusive leaked Trump vetting documents. I didn't realize that there was any Trump vetting or that they had any documents to use for it, but I guess someone put some in a folder somewhere, and now I guess they're out there. Let's grab the Axios write-up of it here. Nearly 100, and quite honestly, if you're the Trump transition team vetting people for hundreds, thousands of government positions, I guess that's very telling right away. It doesn't indicate whether this is the entire cache of Trump transition team documents for vetting purposes, but nearly 100 Trump transition vetting documents for thousands and thousands of jobs with multiple candidates each. They managed to put together 100 documents to do their vetting, and I guess that explains the outcome of, well, not only just the story, but the entirety of the Trump administration and how it's gone. Nearly 100 Trump transition vetting documents leaked to Axios on HBO. Not just Axios, but the Axios on HBO, their little TV series there. Identify a host of red flags about officials who went on to get some of the most powerful jobs in the U.S. government, despite those red flags. I guess why it matters? Well, because this is your government, but that's the way they structure their articles. They want to tell you why it matters in a little bullet that says why it matters, and I guess that's convenient for some people. The massive trove and the story behind it sheds light on the slapdash way President Trump filled his cabinet and administration and foreshadowed future scandals that beset his government. I guess these are the documents that will back up your feeling that you had that the government was put together in slapdash fashion by President Trump, which probably was either formed initially or bolstered by the fact that he has said that most of his cabinet and sub-cabinet choices were driven by people looking like they were out of central casting for the part. So that's probably where you're approaching this story from. But now you will have up to 100 pieces of documentary evidence that he is, in fact, an idiot and chose people for stupid, stupid reasons. Here are some of the highlights out of the 100 pages. Scott Pruitt, who ultimately lost his job as EPA administrator because of serial ethical abuses and clubbiness with lobbyists, which is actually one of the ethical abuses itself, had a section in his vetting form titled Allegations of Coziness with Big Energy Companies, which is to say that they had him dead to rights right from the get-go. And I don't know whether... I imagine there's some chance that Donald Trump saw that and said, that's a good thing. We want that. I mean, I think most people figure that he did. Tom Price, who ultimately resigned as Health and Human Services Secretary, very short-lived tenure there, after Trump lost confidence in him in part for stories about his use of chartered flights. Remember that? Had sections in his dossier flagging criticisms of management ability, and dysfunction and division has haunted Price's leadership on the House Budget Committee. I guess expressed but to no avail. So there you have it. Mick Mulvaney, who became Trump's, everything, I guess, who became his budget director, then became his acting director of the CFPB, and then staying on there at the same time as working now as his acting chief of staff. They don't mention CFPB in here. Mick Mulvaney has a striking assortment of red flags, including his assessment that Trump, quote, is not a very good person. That's not a red flag. That's a green light as far as I'm concerned. But not for these guys, of course. The Trump transition team was so worried about Rudy Giuliani in line for Secretary of State. Can you believe that? Oh, well, where would we be? Where would we be today? They were so concerned, I guess, that they created a separate 25-page document titled Rudy Giuliani Business Ties Research Dossier with copious accounting of his foreign entanglements, which is a huge irony alert all by itself, I guess. That's, wow. Okay, well, like, self-aware much? I guess not. One red flag. One for General David Petraeus. Just one. Who was under consideration for Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Petraeus is opposed to torture. That's the red flag they came up with. Torture is hilarious as a subject. I guess it's nervous laughter. I suppose I'm sitting here. I guess that plus, remember, these are supposed to be red flags as to why you don't get the job and being opposed to torture. Wow, both sides, really. Not a dime's worth of difference between the parties. We'll just put it that way. Behind the scenes is the next section of the stupid way that Axios portrays all of its stories and breaks it down into these different pieces. So here's the behind the scenes segment. In the chaotic weeks after Trump's surprise election victory, Trump fired Chris Christie as the head of his transition. The team that took over, which VP Mike Pence helmed, outsourced the political vetting of would-be top officials to the Republican National Committee. We obtained the political vetting forms that Trump and his senior aides were given for Ben Carson, Dan Coates, Betsy DeVos, Gary Cohn, Don McGahn, Elaine Chao, John Kelly, James Mattis, John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney, Nikki Haley, Rex Tillerson, Rick Perry, Robert Lighthizer, Ryan Zinke, this is going on and on, Scott Pruitt, and many others, and much, much more. President-elect Trump reviewed many of these documents, at Trump Tower and Bedminster, remember the golf course in New Jersey, before his interviews, according to a source who saw him eyeball them. That is to say, I can't promise you he read them. I can tell you that he put them in front of his face and his eyes moved around while he did it. That's all that they could do. I mean, that could be just shorthand and slang, but I have a feeling that it's like they had to check with legal on that. Can we say he read them? I don't know. Better go with eyeball. Traditionally, any would-be top official faces 3 types of vetting: an FBI background check, a scrub for financial conflicts of interest from the Office of Government Ethics, and a deep dive from the president-elect's political team, which veteran Washington lawyers often handle. We obtained many of the political vetting forms. According to sources on the RNC vetting team, senior Trump officials asked them to do an internal scrub of the political record before Trump met the contenders. But in many cases, for example, the misguided choice of Andrew Puzder as Labor Secretary, this RNC's scrub of public sources was the only substantial vetting in Trump's possession when he announced his picks. So they must have done a great job on that one. Well, let's see. The documents show what Trump's vetting shop worried about in assessing candidates for the most important jobs in government. Let's see. Do they tell us what they are, or do they just want to let us know that that's the case? Let's see. The RNC researchers, good, and identified some striking red flags. So we'll go and see what some of those were. How come I can't get a listing of... Okay, I'll have to leave it here. Dang it. I'm trying at the same time to get... to hold on to a couple of tweets that I wanted to share with you later on, and I'm just... blocking up the entrance for new stories now by this point. Okay, RNC researchers identified some striking red flags. The first red flag for Rex Tillerson, who became Trump's first Secretary of State, was about Russia. Tillerson's Russia ties go deep, it read, which, of course, we were told was the reason for his being selected. So that seems kind of odd. In terms of, like why that would be a problem. And I guess it is their way of subtly acknowledging that they knew that Russia ties were going to be a problem because everyone was going to be looking at Trump's Russia ties. And I guess anything that put the word Russia on anybody's lips for any reason was dangerous. Okay. By the way, I see that the Supreme Court is beginning to hand down its decisions, and people are giving their instant analyses of them. So we may want to turn to that in the near future. Don't know whether Armando is following along on these things or up to speed or not available at all. But maybe that's could end up being a Tuesday project. Back to the RNC researchers' red flags. They're weird red flags for their cabinet and sub-cabinet selectees, and those were under consideration. One red flag, just one, for Fox News host Laura Ingraham, considered for White House press secretary. Ingraham said people should wear diapers instead of sharing bathrooms with transgender people. And though they probably believe that you should, they probably were afraid of the diaper wearing thing and not the Nazi salute that she gave at the convention. One heading the document about Chris Kobach in the running for Homeland Security Secretary listed white supremacy as a vulnerability. I'm glad they at least did recognize that as a vulnerability, but it's amazing that it would be something that they would acknowledge themselves and to themselves. It cited accusations from past political opponents that he had ties to white supremacist groups. We believe that. Vetters had unique concerns about Gary Cohn, Some say Cohn has an abrasive, curt, and intimidating style, they wrote. That seems interesting. Citing a Bloomberg piece, he would sometimes hike up one leg and plant his foot on a trader's desk, his thigh close to the employee's face, and ask how markets were doing. I think stunned silence is what I'm going with on that one. An abrasive, curt, and intimidating style, followed by the observation that he would, and this is all, I guess this is a bullet point, so it's written as though it's a title. They have capitalized every word in this sentence. He would sometimes hike up one leg and plant his foot on a trader's desk, which, okay, I'm visualizing. Hike up one leg. I mean, he'd lift one leg. He'd hike up the pants on one leg so that he could lift the leg that high. Is that what? And then he'd plant it on a trader's desk with his thigh close to the employee's face. I don't know if that was the point of that one. So much as, okay, I mean, it's a bad idea to do in the workplace, period. But if you're hiking up one leg, planting a foot on a desk, and positioning yourself so that you're close to this employee's face, is it the thigh that it's all about? Is the question. And I guess this is where you can see the Mike Pence influence on all of this. Oh my God, he's putting his thigh right in that guy's face. Mother help. Really? Yeah, he's just rubbing his thighs all over people. Wow. And then he would ask how markets were doing, because that was the business portion of the event. How are the markets doing? Should my thighs be getting excited? Sure. Wow. Well, I don't know what to tell you about that one. But that's a good one. I guess he didn't do it in the White House. So that's good. Maybe he never did it. Some of the contenders were strikingly swampy, as they put it here in Axios, even by RNC vetters standards. Let's see, who are those people? First, Seema Verma, who Trump appointed as the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, had this paragraph near the top of her vetting form. Verma was simultaneously advising Indiana, $3.5 million in contracts, on issues impacting how it would spend Medicaid funds, while she was also being paid by a client that received Medicaid funds. Ethics experts have called the arrangement a conflict of interest that potentially put Indiana taxpayers at risk. And on the form of Sonny Perdue, Trump's pick for Agriculture Secretary, he had a vetting form with sections labeled business conflicts of interest and family conflicts of interest. It noted that Perdue is the owner of Houston Fertilizer and Grain, a company that has received contracts from the Department of Agriculture. The documents point to Trump's willingness to meet with and sometimes hire people who had harshly criticized him. The vetting team often put these denigrations at the top of the documents. A source with direct knowledge told me many of these documents were handed to Trump. He knew about the insults and picked the insulters anyway. I guess he wanted to get some of that thigh action. Nikki Haley, who became Trump's UN ambassador, had a note that she'd said Trump was everything we teach our kids not to do in kindergarten. Ryan Zinke, who became Interior Secretary, had described Trump as undefendable. And Rick Perry, Energy Secretary, had voluminous vetting concerns. Perry described Trumpism as a toxic mix of demagoguery, mean-spiritedness, and nonsense that will lead the Republican Party to perdition. Perdition, I tell you, the vetters noted. And I guess to no avail on either side of the equation there. The RNC vetted some left field contenders. Nobody we spoke to, including senior members of the transition, could remember what job Hollywood talent agent Ari Emanuel was vetted for. A suggestion for Emanuel in his interview: will you have any personal issues during times when the Trump administration faces partisan criticism from Democrats, including your brother Rahm or President Obama? Good question. I guess. 2 sources who were doing the vetting for the RNC told me they often didn't know what jobs they were vetting people for. Oh, that's a problem. Nor did they. I guess, is Ari Emanuel the weirdest? I would bet that he's the weirdest on the list. Yeah, and I guess they're just all scratching their heads about that one. No more to report about it. Let's see. Axios describing their process in combing through these articles. We are publishing a selection of these vetting documents. Below you can read the forms we obtained for the people who got jobs in the Trump administration, as well as a small group who didn't get jobs, but whose vetting dossiers are noteworthy. They said they redacted personal details that weren't newsworthy. I bet they were, but you couldn't back up reporting them legally speaking. Information from spurious sources and material the vetting team described as rumors about contenders' personal lives and contact and identification information. All the unredacted information is from public sources. We've reached out for comment to the White House, the Republican National Committee, and each person whose vetting form we are publishing. You can see the responses here, and they link it. And we publish the RNC's full statement in a separate article that has behind-the-scenes details about their work. The White House response is next up. President Trump has assembled an incredible team throughout the federal government who, in spite of nearly 93% negative news coverage, has accomplished undeniable successes like tax cuts, which are deniable, record employment levels, a booming economy, rebuilding the military, and crushing ISIS, all of which is disputable, of course. This all from Principal Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley. President Trump has done more to improve the lives of the American people in 2 years than past presidents have done in 8, and no disgruntled establishment D.C. swamp creature's cowardly leaks can change that. Grr. Okay. Well, let's see. There's, how much more should we go? Anybody jump out who needs discussion? Let's see. There are responses from people for whom Axios has published vetting documents. Let's see. So I guess they contacted everybody. So everyone even people who declined to respond are listed here. But let's see. There was a long list of names of vetting documents that they had before. Anybody else jump out that we didn't see anything about? Scott Brown is in there. We could look at that. Terry Branstad is on the list here. Ben Carson was mentioned. Elaine Chao. Oh, yeah, it's a vetting document. Well, she's a pirate. That's not so good. Dan Coates. There's Giuliani. Well, you could look at that one. The whole business ties research dossier. Anybody else of interest? K.T. McFarland, I recognize here. Linda McMahon. That should be interesting. Steve Mnuchin. Interestingly not mentioned earlier in the article, but there it is. Let's see. All these people were mentioned. Wilbur Ross, of course, not mentioned, but on the list. David Clark, that's fun. Tulsi Gabbard, also very interesting. Remember, she was, I guess, getting vetted there too. Right alongside Ari Emanuel, I guess. Anybody else? Pete Hegseth, Marsha Blackburn, Chris Christie himself would have a vetting document as chief of the transition briefly. Admiral Mike Rogers also in the list too. Okay, well, I don't think that there's any reason to go through all of their vetting documents on the air, but we'll see whether they develop into stories of their own along in the course of the week. I imagine we'll see more about those documents as people have a chance to review them. All right, let's see. Yes, this is an important thing, and this is maybe a good, important first test of how will Daniel Dale handle his move to CNN. What did they use him for over the weekend? And the answer is that when Chuck Todd conducted his ridiculous interview with the president, I think the first excerpt from the interview that made the rounds on Twitter was Trump insisting that, in response to Chuck Todd's prodding about having lost the popular vote, Trump lets us know that he conflates, in his mind, claims of voter fraud and widespread voter fraud at that from out of California with an actual court case that was brought by Judicial Watch against the county of Los Angeles and the rest of the state of California about its voter rolls, which Trump made plain in his exchange with Chuck Todd. He, I guess, has convinced himself that the Judicial Watch case proved that California had admitted, through whatever office it might admit such a thing, that they had allowed over 1 million people to vote illegally. And Chuck Todd really appeared to know that this was untrue, and his objections come through over the transcript as sort of weakly interjecting in the middle of Trump's lies, Mr. President. And we have to imagine it is read with a sort of an ironic or disapproving tone. Right? Mr. President, please, come on. As opposed to, please go ahead and lie, Mr. President. That's fine with us. But that's the upshot of what happened. And so, as we often say, there are sometimes kernels of truth hidden, well, deep in the background, let's say, of what Trump's talking about. Usually, it's been perverted through 6 or 7 rounds of the telephone game, and it's sometimes instructive to dig down into it and try and figure out what was this thing about the last time it closely reflected the truth, the last time someone spoke about it in a way that was closely connected with what actually happened here. And to no one's surprise, that does not include anyone admitting to any illegal voting whatsoever, but instead, maybe we can grab I'm pretty sure I have, not that far back in the tweet stream, a screen cap of the portion of the discussion in which he makes this stupid claim. Is this around here somewhere? I think so. Yeah, here it is. So the exchange in transcript form goes a little something like, well, exactly like this. Chuck Todd saying, "You didn't like the fact that you lost the popular vote. That bothered you, didn't it?" It's great insight. Thank you, Chuck. Okay, but he's trying to get somewhere, maybe. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt here. But the problem is he's interviewing Donald Trump, who doesn't want to get there, so he goes somewhere else. President Donald Trump answers, "Well, I think it was I'll say something that, again, is controversial. There were a lot of votes cast that I don't believe. I look at California," and here I have to pause and point out, as I did on Twitter when I saw this thing, this is just a short clip from out of the whole interview, and he goes to one of his favorite standby, his crutches, his verbal crutches, and his tropes. This one is usually a tell for when he's lying, which is almost always, when he's been caught lying, which is fairly frequently, when he knows he's been caught lying, a subset of that group, and when he knows he's been caught lying and he doesn't really know enough about what he's talking about to be able to string together enough words to successfully to toss a word salad together. So his big crutch is, take a look at, or if you look at, or I look at. And those things, I take the meaning of that phrase to be, if you take a look at it. See, if I take a look at it and try to explain it to you, I won't be able to do it. I don't understand it very well, but there are things out there that if looked at, you would understand things my way. I can't explain it to you. I don't know what the things are, even in some cases, and I don't know what they mean, But if I look at it, it's just going to be a mess. But if you look at it, you see, that's the way I read it. If you look at it, then we'll have some chance of coming to a mutual understanding, a shared understanding of what has happened here, and that would explain what's going on. So I'll read you the little transcript in the next 30 seconds or so, I think, and then we'll come back to discuss it and see what Daniel Dale has to say about it, right? So he says, there was a lot of votes cast that I don't believe, which I think means I don't believe were legal, or I shouldn't believe them because I think they were fake. Mr. President, says Chuck Todd. But he won't let Chuck interrupt him with his sarcastic Mr. President. Excuse me. Chuck tries again, but and then Trump just launches into his thing. All right, when we come back, we'll discuss what it is that he launches into and what it really is. Hi, everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue on with the interrupted transcript version of what passed between Chuck Todd and Donald Trump. Chuck Todd bringing up the fact that it bothers Trump to say that he lost the popular vote. And so here's where California comes in. I mean, he wasn't going to win their electoral votes. So to the extent that he cares about California, it is that they cheated, and that's why I lost the popular vote, which I really didn't, because if you look at California and take those fake votes away, then I totally win. I don't know that that's actually the case, because, of course, there weren't any fake votes, but okay. So here, Chuck Todd, it's clear that he knows that it's BS, but he's just ineffectual at cutting in and saying so, and then allows himself to be redirected here. Plus, of course, we get to watch Trump lean on his verbal crutch of if you look at. Like I said, he's depending on you to look at this thing that he's telling you about, because he's looked at it and he can't make heads or tails of it, but surely you can. This is an admission that he knows that you're smarter than he is. But first, Chuck Todd trying to break in. If you look at California, he's Mr. President. Well, excuse me, but that's he knows what it is. That's a lie. But instead, Trump cuts him off. Take a look at Judicial Watch, right? First, he says, take a look at California. Having not convinced Chuck Todd that California is sufficient shorthand for illegal voting, right? I haven't convinced Chuck Todd that there was illegal voting going on in California. So I need to reference something else. That something else is the Judicial Watch case that was brought against California, which I recall, as Trump, I recall it coming to a satisfactory conclusion, but I cannot explain it and I never understood it. And so I therefore implore you, take a look at Judicial Watch. Take a look at their settlement. Look at Judicial Watch. What do you mean look at Judicial Watch? I mean look at the settlement in their case. Why don't you tell me about the settlement in their case? I can't. You need to take a look at it. Take a look at Judicial Watch. Take a look at their settlement where California admitted to 1 million votes. They admitted to 1 million votes. Chuck Todd, of course, knows that it's wrong, and instead of saying, no, they didn't, Mr. President, you misunderstand the case. What happened here was blah, blah, blah. Daniel Dale does that job later on, but a day later and in print and, dollar short, yada, yada. But so they admitted to 1 million votes. Chuck Todd, by way of questioning it, says 1 million votes of what? Right? That's almost a decent follow-up question. in a way. They admitted to 1 million votes. Now, I know what you mean is they admitted that there were 1 million illegal votes in California. They did not admit that, and Judicial Watch didn't get anything of the sort out of California because how could you? Why would you even try? But instead of you're saying there were 1 million illegal votes and there really weren't, and that's wrong. It's a lie, and you're telling people lies in this big-time interview on Meet the Press. This is Meet the Press. You can't just lie and have it sit there as though you didn't. But apparently you can. So this is it. They admitted to 1 million votes. Chuck says 1 million votes of what? And even at that point, even having been given the opportunity to say 1 million illegal votes, 1 million votes of people who shouldn't have been allowed to vote at all and who hate me and voted against me. Even with that door open, Donald Trump, for some reason, can't bring himself to say this. And it's not necessarily that it's certainly not that he's having an attack of conscience. It's that he doesn't understand the facts of the case well enough to be able to state them. And it's immediately obvious. They admitted to 1 million votes. 1 million votes of what? The answer to that is 1 million votes of X. The answer, whatever it is you want to put forward. But instead he says, take a look at Judicial. And he gets cut off again by Chuck Todd. What are you talking about? But he's wanting to say, take a look at Judicial Watch, which he just said. He repeats himself. This is the exchange. Take a look at Judicial Watch. Take a look at their settlement where California admitted to 1 million votes. They admitted to 1 million votes. 1 million votes of what? Take a look at Judicial. That's the strength of his thought process, right there. I say the same thing again and then look at the thing that I said again. Look at it. Just look at it. I mean, that's pretty weak. What are you talking about? Says Chuck Todd. Judicial Watch made a settlement. There was much. He doesn't have anything to say. Chuck Todd intervenes again. About what? Judicial Watch made a settlement about what? There was much illegal voting. But let me tell you about the popular vote. Do you have a second? That's an interesting. Do you have a second? Can I intervene here? Can I get you to listen to this for a second? And again, here Chuck Todd says, I have a second, but we haven't finished with this yet. Judicial Watch made a settlement. There wasn't any illegal voting. The Judicial Watch settlement had nothing to do with it. There's no mention of illegal voting whatsoever in the whole of the settlement. But do I have a second? Yes. And look at that, how easy it is to redirect Chuck Todd. They had admitted 1 million votes. 1 million votes of what? Take a look at the thing that I said. The thing, you should look at it. What are you talking about? Judicial is a thing, a settlement. Take a look. A settlement. A settlement about what? There was much illegal voting. But let me tell you about the popular vote. Do you have a second? Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yes, says Chuck, because you were a big fan of it, the popular vote. There are two. Donald is ignoring what he has to say, the setup for it. Because here's Chuck Todd thinks he's pushing back here. This is why he's probably so upset this morning. Of course I pushed back. In your own way, you sort of did that. Much illegal voting. Do you have a second to tell you about the popular vote? Chuck Todd is trying to say, yeah, you were a big fan of the popular vote until you weren't, i.e. when you lost it. I mean, he probably thought that was really tough. But transcript-wise, it doesn't come off so strong. Do you have a second? Let me tell you about the popular vote. Yes, because you were a big fan of it. There are two. Cut off. Chuck Todd finishing here. Until you weren't. And Trump is redirected at this point. You were a big fan of it until you weren't. And he says, well, I like the popular vote. I don't know what came next. I haven't seen the next section of the transcript. I haven't seen the interview. That's enough for me. What does he lean on? They take a look at how many times this is. Donald Trump speaks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in this exchange. The first time, I look at California. The second time is the excuse me. The third time, take a look at Judicial Watch. Take a look at their settlement. They admitted 1 million votes. 1 million votes of what? Take a look at judicial. What are you talking about? Judicial Watch made a settlement. There was much about what? There was much illegal voting. But let me tell you about the popular vote. Do you have a second? Blah, 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 back and forth. I like the popular vote. So 4 invocations, 8 times he speaks, 4 times he says, take a look, take a look. And this is probably, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds of the exchange. Anyway, in case you were wondering, if you did actually stop everything, stop the tape, let's look at Judicial Watch. Let's take a look over at Judicial Watch. And it will surprise none of you, I think, to learn that if you did actually stop and take a look at the Judicial Watch settlement, here's what you would find. Daniel Dale makes it his business to take a look. Trump makes yet another false claim about California voter fraud, says Daniel for CNN here. Since the first week of his presidency, Donald Trump has falsely claimed that there was mass voter fraud in the 2016 presidential election. He has repeatedly and baselessly singled out California as a supposed center of this fraud. He did so again in an interview that aired Sunday on NBC's Meet the Press. This time he added a new false claim, trying to support the original false one. Host Chuck Todd asked Trump if he is bothered by the fact that he lost the popular vote in 2016. Trump responded, well, I think it was I'll say something that, again, is controversial. There were a lot of votes cast that I don't believe. I look at California. He continued, take a look at Judicial Watch, take a look at the settlement where California has admitted to 1 million votes. They admitted to 1 million votes. Facts first, says Daniel Dale. California made no such admission, and there is no evidence that there was widespread voter fraud in California in 2016. In January, the conservative group Judicial Watch announced that it had settled its 2017 lawsuit against the state of California and the county of Los Angeles. The settlement required the county to remove the names of inactive voters from its voter lists, and it required the state to direct other counties to remove inactive voters from their own lists. Trump got the 1 million figure from Judicial Watch. The group said that as many as 1.5 million registrations would have to be removed in Los Angeles County as a result of the settlement. So 1 million voters in California came from 1.5 million non-voters in Los Angeles County. In fact, as Adam Bonin pointed out to me in discussing this thing over the weekend, basically he's as wrong as he could possibly get without being too far off on the numbers. What he has done here is he has taken Judicial Watch's settlement about purging inactive voters from voter rolls and turned it into something completely different. He has said that Judicial Watch discovered 1 million inactive voters, 1 million people who were registered legally, but who didn't vote and hadn't voted in several years. They were inactive voters, and for various reasons. People, as they pointed out in the article here, they may have moved, they may have died, they may have just decided to stop voting, but inactive voters, they claim for security purposes, essentially, should be removed from the list. The thinking is, if you plot it out a few steps, Judicial Watch doesn't want the names of inactive voters on the lists because that, they think, invites voter fraud, that people will come and pretend to be these inactive voters who have legal and valid registrations and then ask to have ballots that they can cast in the names of these other people who either might be voting elsewhere in California, who may be dead, or who for other reasons are just not voting. That's the thinking on all this. This is where they were trying to go with it. But as far, the only place they were able to get with it is to get a settlement with the County of Los Angeles to say, you know what, we should take a look and see if there's people who have been registered here for whatever amount of time, 5 years, 10 years, who have not bothered to vote even once. Maybe we will deactivate those voter registrations. And if they want to register again, they can go ahead and do it. And Trump turns that into 1 million people, 1 million illegals came to this country and cast their votes against me to embarrass me personally. This is his takeaway from all this. But like, you know, as I think Adam pointed it out best, he's taken 1 million people whose big problem, what has brought them to the attention of the law and the courts, is that they don't cast ballots, and turned them into people who do cast ballots. They are people who are legally registered, and he's turned them into people who are illegally registered. Non-voters into voters. If there's any problem with these people, it's that they're not casting ballots. But in Trump's world, they're casting ballots and they're doing it for Hillary Clinton by the millions. That's how wrong it got to be. So, all right, what about this lawsuit? I mean, I guess let's just examine Daniel's writing about it at least a little bit. There was no evidence, of course, that any of the inactive people voted illegally. Had they voted, they would have likely been voting legally because they were legally registered. You see, there was no evidence at all that they voted at all. That's why they're in court. Judicial Watch itself said most of them are simply voters who have moved to another county or state or have passed away. And California did not admit any wrongdoing as part of the settlement. They take a look at Judicial Watch. California admitted. No, California did not admit anything. And even if they had admitted to what was at issue in the case, it wouldn't have had anything to do with illegal votes being cast. The Judicial Watch settlement provided no evidence of fraud whatsoever, said Rick Hasen, an expert in elections law and a professor of law and political science at University of California at Irvine. Studies have shown that voter fraud is very rare in the U.S. Let's get some statistics out there. And there has been no indication of widespread fraud in California in 2016. In 2018, the Los Angeles Times reported there were 149 cases investigated by state officials in 2016, more than most years over the past decade. Investigators found only 6 cases out of 23.1 million votes cast worth sending to a local district attorney. So 6 cases, 149 allegations and investigations. 6 of them were worth sending to the district attorney. No word what happened after that, whether any of the 6 were actually prosecuted, and what might have happened with those prosecutions. Doesn't seem to have made a great deal of difference for anybody in California. But just in case you were wondering what kernel of truth there was behind this idiocy and the babbling, now you have your answer. What are you going to do with that? I don't know. All right, let's see. Perhaps we'll save 1 or 2 of these stories for the balance of the week. And let's see. Discuss some of these things. Oh, here's something interesting just by way of updating you on all of that awesome oversight that you're totally getting from your House Democrats. I know we dump on them an awful lot. And they are making some headway in some things. And if you're willing to be really, really patient and comb over their record as between now and, let's say, the 2006, 7, 8 period, though they're not getting anywhere that we were hoping that they were going to get in this amount of time here, I guess it's arguable that it's moving somewhat faster than it moved during 2006 through 2008. It was extraordinarily slow, and many people suspected at that point that the idea was to push the controversy into court and leave it there such that there would be no resolution before it became time to obsess over the 2008 presidential election and congressional elections, and implore people to steer clear of impeachment and other controversial charges against the Bush administration and focus instead on the elections. And, of course, that's the suspicion that everyone's facing now. Slightly different, though, dynamic in it being the end of the Bush administration with no possibility of his continuing in office, which is very different from the situation we face now. Not to mention the possibility that Trump would attempt to stay in office even beyond a second term, and people are writing about it. It's actually a part of popular discussion. We'll save that for later in the week, perhaps. Although, yeah, it's a little counterintuitive that the oldest president ever elected would start engaging in this chatter. But I suppose if it's that or die in prison, you start to take up that conversation. Anyway, what I wanted to grab here was CNN again reporting on Democrats to cut deal to hear from White House counsel office insider. Source says. Pamela Brown and Manu Raju reporting this one. Is it a deal to be pleased with or disappointed in? Let's see. The House Judiciary Committee appears to have reached a deal with former White House aide Annie Donaldson that would allow her to not appear before the committee by a Monday deadline, that would be today, and answer written questions instead, according to sources familiar with the matter. Why would that have happened? I do not know. What do they hope to get out of this deal? Unsure. The testimony of Donaldson, who was chief of staff for then White House counsel Don McGahn, has been of high interest to House Democrats given her firsthand knowledge of key events. Donaldson said she took copious notes, which the committee believes will bolster its probe into potential obstruction of justice. The committee issued a subpoena in May for her testimony by Monday. So issued in May, maybe late May, let's say. All of June has pretty much passed, and she was supposed to testify by today. But Donaldson's attorney and Democrats have discussed allowing her to answer written questions instead. Is that terrible? Is that worse? I don't know. Clearly they think it's to their advantage, but why? I'm not really sure. Anyway, they've allowed her to answer in writing instead, in part because she is pregnant, okay, and lives in Alabama. Okay. Not really sure. Is she late in her pregnancy and she can't travel? We could have a field hearing for her, but then that would be difficult to televise, though you can always make a videotape of it. And I guess they thought... I guess they probably thought they were vulnerable. Isn't this amazing? Could we be vulnerable on this issue? Well, you can't do that to her. She's pregnant, her child. Well, that's so important, and she has to be able to keep the child and herself in good health, and you can't disrupt that sort of thing. P.S., let's put everybody in baby jails. But you don't want to, take it out on this, on her, on her fetus, and it's not like a great idea to punish them, to punish this child, or possibly damage the baby's health because you're angry about the way they've handled other people who actually have living babies who have been born. Now, letting her do written questions instead of giving testimony because she lives in Alabama, I don't know if that's really a valid excuse either. Like, we'd like some information from you because we thought that when you didn't live in Alabama and lived in Washington, D.C., you might have been involved in some criminal activity. Can we get you to answer some questions? No, because I left and went to Alabama. I think, though, in combination, obviously, being pregnant and in Alabama, and maybe it's late in her pregnancy and she's not able to comfortably or safely travel, but whatever. Under the terms outlined, Donaldson would be required to answer questions within a week, and the committee would reserve the right to bring her in for testimony after November 1st, according to one of the sources. She has yet to receive the written questions from the committee. That's a problem. But will consult with the White House on which questions she can answer, the source said. So it's entirely possible she'll get a list of written questions and then say, I refuse to answer all of them. I don't know whether reserving the right to bring her in for testimony after November 1st is supposed to be, is that her expected delivery date plus some maternity leave? Is that what we're actually doing here? We are perhaps being far too kind in all of this, especially since we may extend things to November only to hand her written questions, only to have her return answers of I refuse to answer these questions. But won't someone think about the children who are the reason I can't come there and testify? A committee source told CNN Saturday that since it's difficult for Donaldson to travel, Democrats are looking to make an accommodation for her. Donaldson's attorneys, Sandra Moser, told CNN that they are pleased an accommodation has been reached at this time, but how much information Donaldson will ultimately be able to provide to the committee is another question. The White House has claimed that current and former White House officials have absolute immunity, whatever that's supposed to mean, preventing them from answering questions to Congress about their time in the White House, as it did with former aide Hope Hicks earlier this week. That would have been, of course, last week. The committee plans to take the matter to court in the hopes of forcing the aides to comply with their subpoena. The White House also has specifically directed Hicks and Donaldson not to turn over any documents to the House Judiciary Committee relating to their time in the White House. We'll have to discuss that perhaps some point later in the week, or even later than that possibly, with Armando, the idea of absolute immunity, which is not really a doctrine of any sort. It's sort of, I mean, it's apparently it's not new. Armando has pointed out that there have been administrations in the past asserting an immunity from testimony along similar lines, but it is interesting. I mean, the idea of we just call it absolute immunity. There's immunity from answering questions by Congress, from Congress, about working in the White House. It's not executive privilege per se. They were explicitly asked if they were invoking executive privilege with respect to Hope Hicks, and the answer is no. They're simply saying all White House employees are absolutely immune from answering any questions about what went on there, whether they were a part of a deliberative process or not. And that this immunity is, I guess, absolute, unchallengeable in every respect. And the only one that I know of, the only privilege or immunity like that I can think of as being absolute in any way is if they were invoking their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. There's not very many ways you can get people to break through that. That's as close to absolute immunity from answering questions that I can think of. And I thought about it last week a little bit, just, should we be just saying, is that incriminating? Should we just be saying, yeah, they're all taking the Fifth? Hope Hicks took the Fifth 155 times in her supposed testimony before the House Judiciary Committee, because it might be somewhat effective just because of what Donald Trump has said in the past about the implications of invoking the Fifth Amendment. But, we could probably spend some time later in the week or next week examining the history of this fake notion of absolute immunity for White House employees. Just sort of an interesting twist on things. And, I guess there's some special circumstances here, and the woman's pregnancy, I guess, provides an interesting jumping off point for differentiating her case from others. But point being here, it's not looking good in terms of bringing things to any sort of conclusion before it becomes time to panic about the upcoming election, which is pretty much the play that we all thought that they were running from the very beginning. I took a look back at the record of the Democratic House from 2006 through 2009, as it turns out, in trying to get people to comply with their subpoenas under the George W. Bush administration. And as it turns out, it took a little over 2 years from the date of the issuance of the subpoena to actually getting Harriet Miers to answer questions for the House Judiciary Committee. And as a matter of fact, as I mentioned, it stretches into 2009. It wasn't until it was too late, till 2009, and Barack Obama was president and George W. Bush was out, that they actually got Harriet Miers to answer questions. And lo and behold, no one seemed to care very much what the answers were once George W. Bush was not president anymore. And then poof, no one can remember anything else about Harriet Miers ever since. And that's kind of been the end of it. But we've been down this path a number of times before, as we've discussed on the show in the past. It goes all the way back to Neil Gorsuch's mom being the recalcitrant witness, and Democrats, unfortunately, haven't got a whole lot better at getting what they need out of oversight hearings and testimony. They have gotten a little faster in the turnaround, but still, unfortunately, we're still waiting for those court cases which we've carefully crafted, allegedly, to transfer the contempt power to the courts, haven't been filed.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, now you can be listening to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Instead, we'll take a look at a couple of items he has on tap here. CNN media analyst Bill Carter is stunned to find out that Fox's Sean Hannity is nothing more than a right-wing propagandist. The biggest story of the weekend that we may have ignored. Next with Justice.